it's going to go in there okay. Basically, solder melts at about 475 degrees. So you're not going to want to touch any of this stuff once it's good and hot. Make sure you move heat sensitive stuff out of the way before you get the torch out and start torching on it. All the castle connectors have this little hole in there, and it's really great to be able to feed solder right into the joint. So I think I'll turn that to where I can see it. But basically, we're just going to want to get the torch out and start heating that connector up. You don't want to heat it too far down; you'll burn the silicone. But it doesn't take a whole lot to get that connector. You'll see it probably move when it starts to get good and hot and that solder starts to melt. The point of the solder on the inside is to make a good connection to the solder that's already on the wire. Oh, see it fall over right there? So that way you know that it's getting hot, so I'll just push that on there. At this point, that is soldered together, but it's not good enough because there's air gaps on the inside. So you just keep heating this up, and where that little hole is, you just feed some solder in. Kind of sitting farther back than I usually would, but more or less, when that thing starts to get full of solder, you'll see that solder kind of pooch out down around the bottom and let you know that it's all the way full. So when it's done, you'll have kind of a bead. Let me turn this thing off so you can hear me. You'll have kind of a bead build up around here. Of course, I flung my little bead off, moving this thing before it was cooled, and got air back in there. But basically, yeah, you want to heat that up until you can see just kind of a little ring of built up solder around the bottom, and that lets you know that that whole connector is full of solder. So I'm going to go ahead and heat that back up and fix that. One thing that you can do, like if you're using a smaller gauge wire at this point, is while that connector is still hot, you can actually take and just grab it and tweak it, make it straight with the wire while the solder is still cooling. And then wherever you put it, when that solder cools, it's going to keep in that connector in that direction. So if you're using like a smaller gauge wire that would otherwise kind of roll around on the inside of that, like this one would, you know, your connector might end up crooked. But when you're soldering it, if you just pull it back to straight while it's cooling, it'll stay straight and you'll have a nice looking connector. So that's basically how to put on one of these Castle 6.5s. This one's kind of sloppy because it got ripped apart when the ESC melted and it was getting sent off to Castle. But you can kind of see that the solder built up around that bottom edge lets you know you've got a good connection the whole way around. From there, you're going to want to use some heat shrink. I buy the stuff at the auto parts store that has a sealer in it. You can kind of see that, let's see, on one of these. Try and pick one that's pretty obvious. You can see that yellowish kind of a sealer right there. What that is, it's an adhesive, it's a glue, but it also makes a watertight connection. You don't want water sitting anywhere in your wires and stuff. It gets in there and just makes corrosion, and that will just kill your stuff later on down the road. So I like to use the stuff. You can see it's kind of got like a pasty white on the inside of it, like a little film built up in there, and that it's basically hot glue that melts when you're hitting it with a lighter or something like that. The stuff that I've got right now is just about exactly the same diameter as the connector itself. It used to be a hair bigger. As it ages and goes through some heat cycles, it actually shrinks just sitting in your house. But that's not a real big deal. So what I'll do, usually I'll cut about an extra 1/4 inch of the heat shrink. And I've learned a neat little trick over the years to take some needle nose pliers and stretch it out. Heat shrink is pliable. It's plastic, or a plastic mix, I guess you'd call it. uh, that will stretch. So I'll just stretch that out, and that gets me back to my original size that fits right over my connector pretty well. What I like to do is, it's going to shrink both in diameter but also in length. So if you go like an extra 1/16 of an inch over the end of the connector before you heat it up, it'll pull it down and make a real nice end on there for you. So we'll just do that. That glue on the inside gives you an added benefit. Like you can see, I'm a little too far over the edge there. While it's still hot, you can actually pull it back and get that end just perfect on there. It's basically viscous, the glue, and that will get you a real nice end. So. Kind of sloppy because I'm in a bit of a hurry because we're doing a video. If you need to, I have taken like a whole piece, gone a 1/4 inch off the end of it, and then later went back with my X-Acto knife and cut it just to get a real nice flat edge on there. Anymore, I think I'm liking to have that end covered just a hair, so that when you're plugging it in, if you hit on the side and don't have your connectors perfectly lined up, I've noticed with the 8S Spark that that connector will stick to the outside and not line up. So I kind of like to have that rolled edge in there, so that when I push my connector in, it has to be lined up before it actually makes a contact and does that little spark, and then you can keep pushing it in. Just a little thing that I've noticed. So that's a female connector. The male connectors are just exactly the same thing. They take a little bit more heat to heat up because there's so much more metal. It's not just as hollow like a little sleeve like that female is. So that's basically just a sleeve to here and a sleeve to there with a little block in between, where this is got a little more mass to it. So same kind of a deal. I would just grab this. I use a vise a lot, but you could get away with some vise grips or whatever if you wanted to. Don't grab it too hard with the vise grips. You don't want to bend it, but you don't want it to fall out. But if you wanted to, you could probably pull that out of there. That's about the right tension. Don't really bind down on them, because you'll bend it and trash your connector. So basically what I would do from here is heat it up with a soldering iron. Just hit it with just enough solder to where that flux pulls the solder around on the inside, and makes a good coating on the surface. You don't necessarily need a buildup of solder in there. And then when your wire's prepped, when you shove your wire up in there, when that solder on the inside melts, it'll melt and make contact with this solder. That'll transfer the heat from this connector into this wire. Everything will be pretty well evenly heated. So that's the deal. The Y cables that I made took a little bit of work. I had to take that female end and use a Dremel and wallow it out just a hair, to give me just a little bit more room. You'll notice that this is actually 10 gauge wire versus the thicker 8 gauge wire that'll come on your XL. Yeah, I got that from some leftover bits and pieces, Mamba Max motor stuff that have been cut down. I try and always save my scraps for doing something just like that. Those two little pieces right there, they seem useless when they're sitting on your bench. Like, why would I ever save that? Well, you might save that to do something like that. But anyway, what I ended up doing for these, after I had wallowed that out just a hair, the two circles, of course, are going to be pretty wide. So in come the little smash it trick. Solder them up, get them all prepped like that. Put the two of them together, and smash them down. Make it a round connector. That stuff bends pretty easy, and you can get that down into the shape that you need to fit down into that connector that's been opened up just a hair. I mean, they almost fit now, but you really got to work it. Basically what you end up with is two half moon, or semicircles I should say, that fit together, make a circle, and fit in the end of the connector. It's pretty tricky to make that little Y cable, but that's what you would use if you wanted to parallel a set of packs, and then that male-male connector would be what you'd use if you wanted to series the packs. So one of the things you can do, I mean, if you're really intent on making nice heat shrink on the end of them, is you can actually put the connectors together after they're soldered, but before you put the heat shrink on. Put that piece of heat shrink over that whole connector and heat it up, and then go back with an X-Acto knife later and cut at that seam. And then you've got two perfectly matching connectors that go together. Your heat shrink looks good, all that kind of stuff. You know, I was pretty excited about getting mine together. I didn't really take the time that I should have to make it pretty and nice, but that's series parallel and your Mamba XL with connectors. I wish I had my Mamba XL to demonstrate for you. I'll have it in another week or so. Castle was shipping out my replacement. I ought to have shipping confirmation anytime now, but we're getting off the topic. That's basically it. I mean, the key pieces are the Bensamatic torch. You could do these connectors with a full-blown just a soldering gun. I think this one's 180 or 220 watts, I think it is. It gets hot enough, but the coil, the transformer in here that heats that tip up, can get pretty warm itself, and if you keep this thing on for 5-10 minutes straight, you're running a good risk of burning the gun up. So I've just preferred to go with the torch. You could get one of those little pocket torches at the auto shop or parts house locally. Plumbing places, Ace Hardware, stuff like that. They'll have the smaller torches too if you don't need like a full-blown campfire starter, which is what that is to me. But yeah, so that's about it. So wish you luck. I hope you enjoy your ride, and we'll see you on the forums.